about comms and how that nudges our perceptions of some of the brand mental networks that John and John were talking about earlier. But before I do that, I just need to get a little bit of a gauge on you, the audience. How many of you are over 45? If you could just put your hand in the air. Okay, so this side of the room much older than that side. Some of the jokes are going to work much better for you. There's going to be a little bit more nostalgia, a little bit more of a call to action for that side. So let's see how this goes. Okay, so what am I going to talk about? First of all, the enduring nature of humans. Everything changes, we haven't so much. But what happens around us is changing. It is becoming more fragmented. We need to understand that. And finally, about how we might build collective memories through advertising so that we can build stronger brand mental networks. Just to remind you, in case you've forgotten, this is the brand mental network. It's all about those experiences, but also those advertising memories that come through and actually help us all experience brands in a similar way. And why is that important? Well, fundamentally, as humans, we want to be part of something bigger. We want to be part of society. We want to feel like we belong, that we fit in. And actually, advertising, programs, things around us give us some of this sense of community and also give us something to talk about, understand our role in our pecking order. And absolutely, that's why agencies keep banging on about culture. It's us out there in the world. Some people want to absolutely form, drive, change culture, while others want to play in it. But actually using those devices, the things around us are the things that we're familiar with and that help make us human, can make stronger advertising. And actually, advertising really did used to be part of culture. So this big red line here, the adverts are as good as the programs. Back in the 80s, that some of you, particularly on this side, will remember, actually, advertising did tend to be pretty damn good. Fell off a cliff. And then around 2012, 2013, what I call the John Lewis effect kicked in. And actually, we did at least once a year start to see some decent advertising that we could talk about. But for this side of the room, we remember these things. We remember Smash. We remember Guinness Surfers. We remember Hovis. A little bit more of that later. Nick came in his pants. See, lots of laughs on this side of the room. The Oxo family really bring to life British culture and what it means to be a proper family, and sometimes the kids not coming in and eating. Later examples, actually meerkats and simples entering actually the vernacular and becoming a catchphrase. And of course, who could forget Tango? And actually the guy, Trevor Rumson, who was the creative on this, he knew that he had made a great ad when he heard the kids on a train start talking and emulating the lines from the ad, and really just it being part of that school ground kind of culture. Obviously, doctors not so keen with the whole bursting of the eardrums, but, it got out there, it got people talking, it created strong brand mental networks. People still talk about this to this day. But the world is becoming more fragmented. In the last 20 years, there are now 17% more one-person households in the UK than there were before. So actually, we as human beings are becoming singular. We're being cut off from this wider community. We're having less opportunities to talk about things in a communal way and to form some of these memories. So we need to think about how we can help to bring people together. Particularly because in the old days, when we were youngish, there were only a few ways to communicate to people, and actually you would get the same messages, you'd understand the same thing about brands. But now, loads of different ways to touch people, and therefore actually slightly different messages to each individual, which can be really useful if you want to up the relevance. But if you want to deepen this cultural understanding and really build some of those strong collective memories, a little bit more difficult to do. So how might we go about it in this day and age? Well, we should think about TV. It's still a big thing that sits in your living room, and actually we all watch it. And when we're watching TV, and I should say watching the screen, because not necessarily actually watching TV programs, but when we're watching that screen in the living room, what is it that we're after? Thinkbox did a needs state evaluation, and actually what they found was that 10% of the time we're looking for something that creates that shared experience, that gives us something we might want to talk about at the water cooler. Now, most of it, this big old 68%, is live TV. It's still people watching telly in the way that they've always done so. Some other bits, which we'll come back to later, but, broadly, watching broadcast TV. Which is why, increasingly, old days ads were better, now very much water cooler moments, Game of Thrones, Bodyguard, was she dead, wasn't she dead? Fleabag, of course, my favourite. What was with the fox? Who knows? But these things, really got people talking, and they started to actually have those communal conversations again. And if we think about how that translates into advertising, there are a couple of ways that we might go about it. John talked about Direct Line and how actually they tapped into both nostalgia for the character, but also really spent on broadcast TV to bring the character to life for them. I'm going to talk a little bit about walkers, because again, this side of the room, sorry guys, I'll be back with you in a sec. Walkers, way back when the Spice Girls were the biggest band that had ever existed, apart from maybe the Beatles, they were all over the crisps. And they also produced some advertising that people could talk about. Now, this ad, I am going to apologise both for the quality of the ad, it was a long time ago, and it's not my fault about the content of the ad. Let's have a look. Such great advertising lines, but very much playing on culture. They were being part of culture. The Spice Girls were enormous. Gary Lineker was the best footballer that had ever lived, and you could get away with bull jokes. So that's what it was before. Recently, they've just taken over the Twitter sphere to try and find the Spice Girls' greatest fan. Spice Girls coming back. Crisps are always popular. How can you marry the two things together? So big Twitter campaign, big social media campaign, who is the greatest fan? And then Britain's Got Talent, people, the final 90 seconds of takeover for one of those cultural moments where actually old people and their kids are coming together and they can form another cultural moment. Embracing a better and more up-to-date style of advertising. So this is actually their greatest fan. He's a comedian, but the greatest fan still isn't giving them his crisps, though. So he is not going to go to the concert. Instead, his mum gets to go. But what they've done with this is they've understood what's really big in culture. They've understood how they can create conversations, and then they made it easy for people to do so and to share and create their own community. Of course, I said we'd touch back on the Hovis ad. You can do it in a different way. These guys have literally taken their old ad, digitally remastered it, which is genius, because then they can share the story of how they've done it, why they've done it, and why it's still relevant for today. Popped it back on air. Bob's your uncle. Hovis has something to fight against Warburtons. Or, again, something possibly more for this side of the audience, but it'll have relevance for you shortly. You can start to think about who's watching that linear TV and start to think about how you might want to tribalize that viewing experience. So, who, and I suspect more over here, remembers Kim Wilde? Okay, guys, maybe, have a look, see whether it makes any sense. If not, I'll explain it later. Here's Kim tribalising those of us over 40.
Remember me? Spiky hair, ripped jeans, they're the kids in America? No? Well, go check your Snapchat or something. Well, I talk to the grown-ups who do. Dark milk. It's a completely new type of chocolate from Cadbury. Creamy like milk chocolate, but also richer and darker too. Made for people like us, who are no longer kids, in America, or anywhere else really.
The richest creamy chocolate Cadbury has ever made. New dark milk.
So actually just making a little bit of community for those of us who are old enough to remember these things. But what about this side of the room? Now, I didn't actually ask whether you were under 34. Some of you may have fallen in that awkward gap in the middle. But actually, you can see that 20% of what they're wanting is in online videos. So they're using a screen in the living room, but they're using it to watch online videos. So how might we start to build some of these things with that audience? Well, first of all, you have to remember that Gen Z and the younger end of the millennials are human too. Often quite difficult to remember given all the conferences where suddenly they become these mythical creatures. But fundamentally, at the heart of it, they're still human, still want community. And actually, I've been to a lot of conferences recently, particularly Adweek, where there are billions of talks about Gen Z, but all about how they're yearning for experiences, they're yearning for things that will bring them together. It's the sort of thing that you might use memes for. But we do need to think about where they are. Easy to find older people, still telly, but where are the younger guys going? And where they're going in sufficient volume that you might then start to have some communication that can actually build some of these communities and some collective brand mental networks. Well, Nike have done this excellently. So here's Londoner. I'm not going to play it all, it's 2 minutes 40, but I am going to play a little bit of it to help you understand what they've done. They literally went to the streets of London, took some of the influencers, some of the different communities that they found, and then built communication around it to reflect the diversity that there is in the city. So literally taking the stories of all the communities and then showing them through online video, amplifying that, so much so that actually people started to make their own versions of this. So Birmingham has one, Radio 1 made one, and it just keeps going. It starts getting into the vernacular. People start to say, to build on these themselves, and that's what really builds the strong mental networks, the stories that go with it. So, one more question. It's the final bit of audience participation. Who knows what Twitch is? Okay, a few gamers in the room. Actually, what Twitch is essentially a social media platform where you can go and watch people play games. You can interact with people. There's a whole load of chat that goes on while anything's happening. They have live events. You can tell, I just really love these guys. Because actually what they've done is they have built a community of like-minded people, and then they are very careful about how they curate that and how they work with brands to actually create moments that people can come together and then talk about afterwards so that it lives on. And these, I think, are the types of platforms where we might want to think about, are there sufficient people there that we can start to build some of these brand mental networks in a way that people bond over, that brings that belongingness that we as humans crave. So this is my call to action for all of you clients out there. Please remember, humans need community. We need it to survive and to feel good about ourselves. It is getting tough out there. It is fragmented. We are becoming fragmented from our own society. Media is becoming fragmented. We're not hearing the same things. We're lacking some of those things where we can talk to each other about them. And if that is true, then in order to make the Gen Z guys at this end of the room happy and productive citizens who go out and buy our brands, let's really think about how we, through advertising, can contribute to that community. Thank you.